Okay, it's time to talk about Tron 1, 2, and 3, which just came out. Not just a little bit about the story, but some commentary on the 3D, because is a subject of uh, strong feelings. There's people who say this is the greatest 3D movie ever. There's people that say this is meh. There's people who are right in the middle. So let's just look at the facts of the situation and sort that out. First of all, it all started in the 80s with Tron, which had groundbreaking special effects. And understandably, it probably was not quite understood at the time by common audiences because people didn't use personal computers or smartphones or anything related to that back then. So the concepts might not have fully registered or the allegory that was associated with them. But nevertheless, I think this is one of the uh, relatively few movies that are focused on technology that age well. Think of other movies and the tropes along with them. Think of Jurassic Park, that one scene where the girl has basic computer usability skills and she says, "I'm a hacker." Some of this stuff comes off as cringe years later, or oversimplifications or over dramatizations. Of course, this is a fantasy, and of course, there is oversimplifications and uh, exaggerations at play, but it's done in a way that I don't think personally comes off as cringy decades later. And in fact, some of the stuff has become even more relatable with the skyrocketing rise of AI in recent years. And as far as the visuals go, also style-wise, there's been a resurgence in minimalist aesthetic, and I think this plays right into that. And this was recorded on large format film, and some restoration work has been done, and including some correction work to make it look better than ever. I watched the new 4K remaster, and this kind of movie that's made for HDR with the high contrast and the colors. It just looks stunning. This movie made 40 something years ago just looks very beautiful. And I still think it's still fascinating to see these early computer animations that were one of a kind at the time, but that were not even printed to film like they used to do. They used to have to print special effects into film and then work it in optically. This was before even that. They had to film it off of a screen, film the individual frames off of the screen, and then make a computer animated movie out of that, and then work that into the movie. So there's a lot of stuff at play. They were making it up as they went, and I think it aged very well. And you can see its influence on pop culture in the decades to come, like The Matrix, Spy Kids, Wreck-It Ralph, even Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I won't get into the detail there, but if you saw Tron, you probably know what I'm talking about. Now, there are other elements to the franchise, such as video games, comics, notably animated TV show called Tron Uprising that fleshes in the time period between this and the next film. And these can be interesting to fill in the blanks a little bit, but they're not necessary to understand the story, as that's pretty much explained briefly, but what you need to know in the next movie. And that next movie from a few decades later was Tron Legacy. And this movie was made in 3D in what could be called still the early years of 3D, digital 3D getting its footing after the success of Avatar. Now, just to put this out there, there has been some confusion about the first Tron being available in a 3D version, and that's likely because of a Blu-ray set that was released that contained both the movies in a two-pack and with a 3D logo on it because it includes the second movie in 3D. But the first movie is not in 3D, only the second one, and of course the third one, which we'll talk about later. Here's a look at the standalone Blu-ray 3D of Tron Legacy with the lenticular cover. And as you notice, it has the discs look like the discs in the movie that are on their back. back when they did digital copy discs, which was an absurd concept, and 2D disc and 3D disc. So anyway, it starts out with a nice Tron-styled 3D Walt Disney logo, and it also has a 3D segment of like TVs. It's sort of plot exposition of showing news clips and whatnot, getting you up to speed on where the story is at this point in time. However, the opening and closing scenes, which take place in the real world, are all filmed in 2D, and all the stuff in the middle inside the digital system is in 3D. So just some thoughts on that. In the opening, you get to see a digital, uh, de-aged version of Jeff Bridges. And this young version of him is also seen throughout the bulk of the movie as the villain, which is his digital equivalent, which went rogue. And this was before technology progressed in that regard. It's still progressing, but it was even more cartoonish looking then. Personally, I don't have a huge problem with it. Um, just like I didn't mind the stuff in Rogue One where they remade Tarkin. Um, they definitely did a better job with him than Leia, that's for sure. But regardless, I'm okay with whatever helps tell the story. I don't mind using my imagination a little bit. But that being said, I think it would have been better if they showed less Flynn in that first sequence because it just juxtaposed with the real people is just so obviously cartoonish. And in context, that fits much better in the digital world. You can kind of excuse that because nothing there is real anyway. So if they just stuck to that side shot where you see his profile, you get the picture. But instead, at the end, they went for a head-on, like, glory shot to show what their best work was, and their best work wasn't that great at that point in time. But anyway, that's just a personal nitpicking. As far as the 2D sequence that was at the end of the movie, before the end credits, back in the real world, the opening shot of that 2D sequence actually has an error where there's a frame delay between the left and right eyes. So when it's panning up, there's like huge vertical parallax. And also when he's moving his hand sideways at an angle, it's just in two completely different positions. So that's a little jarring on the eyes, but it's only for one shot of that 2D segment. I'd be interested to know if anybody saw the re-release they just had in IMAX theaters. I'm wondering if they fixed that. Uh, They probably didn't. I mean, because it was already mastered for IMAX years ago, so they probably didn't bother. But I'd be interested to know if you noticed that or not. So, getting down to the quality of the 3D. This is a touchy subject because a lot of people enjoy this 3D film. I enjoy this 3D film personally. I think overall it is a good 3D movie and definitely easily the best way to watch it. But there's definitely some overblown opinions out there and exaggerations about its quality. First of all, there are some great 3D moments. There are a couple extreme pop-outs, and the best 3D moments were natively rendered in 3D animation, such as these shots seen here coming straight out of the screen towards the viewer. These are great 3D moments. And by the way, if you're watching the 3D version of this episode, which is in the members section, you'll get to see a half-width side-by-side version of 4K SPS for your 3D TV projector or the display. So yeah, there are a few strong 3D shots. Moderate uh, native 3D shots, and there are also faint shots that were rendered in 3D animation. And you wonder why some of them weren't made stronger considering it was completely animated environment. And I would say faint is the the key word here, and that is through most of the movie. Yes, this was filmed, the live action portions were filmed in native 3D with a 3D camera rig, but with 3D mirror rigs, you can achieve zero parallax if desired. and they definitely played it safe, perhaps to avoid the ghosting and high contrast scenes. And I would say, despite the 3D being consistently weak throughout, it's not bad. I mean, it's not inaccurate for the most part. There are a few shots where things get a little wonky, but I say by and large, it's decent 3D. And what helps the 3D along in some shots is the atmospheric elements. And this has even been talked about by those behind the scenes online, how volumetric elements and smoke and light flares were added, and this boosted the range of 3D beyond what it actually was for the objects on screen. Like the light cycle sequence is a great example. Not especially strong 3D, but you got these lens flares all over the place, expanding the range of depth that you see on the screen. And it looks like strong 3D if you don't think too hard about it. And like towards the end, very almost no depth at all, a little bit, but barely there. But you got this light flare shining down from the top straight through the center, and there you go. You boosted the range of depth in that scene. You got smoke floating around. So it kind of reminded me of the phrase "smoke and mirrors." You got a mirror rig, you got smoke effects. That's what it's doing basically. And you know what? I don't mind. It's nice. That adds to the immersion. And especially with the variable aspect ratios, it switches from scope to the IMAX ratio. That really helps with the effect, and it's a nice experience, especially when you're watching on a projector, to have these scenes open up and to have that atmospheric elements in the 3D. It does the job. Could it have been stronger? 100% yes, it could have been. But again, this was earlier on in the digital 3D days. They had to aim for the lowest common denominator. As far as ghosting, I I I think that's been proven not to be a concern nowadays. I mean, unless you're watching on a older flat panel that doesn't handle it well. But the new Tron movie had stronger 3D, and the ghosting was not a problem, despite the high contrast visuals. But along with this insistence that this is top tier 3D, which it just plain isn't, Avatar, which came out before it, is multiple times that, and Pixar animated films, which are famous for being modest with the 3D, are stronger than this. So it's really about the quality of the visuals that you're seeing, which may be mistaken in some people's minds for or conflated with stereoscopic strength, which are completely unrelated. Unfortunately, some vertical parallax did end up in some of the native 3D shots. I can be kind of sensitive to that. Like one shot, I felt it right away, just a twinge of my eyes having to track something, one little up, one a little down. You might know that feeling, because vertical parallax is not supposed to happen. Or we aren't lizards. It only goes this way to converge, but not up and down independently. And I felt that happening. I was like, whoa, this is a vertical parallax moment. Paused it, uh, zoomed in. Sure enough, a little bit, but it's there. And thankfully, this is not most of the time, but it did work its way into some shots, either in the background or worse yet, in the subject of focus, like in this key 3D shot, which was cool otherwise. Had a little bit of a pop out, but it also had vertical parallax, unfortunately. Anyway, I kind of lost track of where I was going with that. I was saying, in the insistence to say the 3D in this movie is so phenomenal. Everywhere you look, they're gonna say this is a native 3D movie. This was shot completely natively, and it does have a lot of native 3D. But I swear it also has a lot of converted 3D. I don't think you're gonna hear that anywhere. But this has a lot of converted 3D, unless I'm going completely crazy, unless I'm losing my mind, unless I'm going stereoscopically blind. This has a lot of converted 3D, and I mean converted by 2010 standards, which, if you remember, is not great. Now, various post-production companies worked on Tron Legacy. Prime Focus, which is known for 3D conversions, also does other post work, and there's no evidence that they did any 3D conversion on it. However, another company, Digital Domain, and I kinda had to dig to find this, um, a passing reference to another company called In3, which does 3D conversions, says that they worked with Digital Domain to, unquote, "some sequences" in Tron Legacy. How many is some? I don't know, but I can tell you that there are a lot of these shots throughout the movie, eh, interspersed throughout, the whole film, and they just, look weird, as you would expect from, uh, these conversions of the time, almost like some TV's auto conversion or, like, very simplistic rotoscoping. Of course, there's the shots you might expect that can't easily be filmed with a 3D rig, even a mirror rig, like close-up shots, but also some semi-close shots where there's clear, instances of rotoscoping outside the lines, or, like this shot where you see just basically her shoulder is rotoscoped just to give it a little bit of a relief from the background, and then when the camera pans up, she's still slightly rotoscoped, um, but it's just basically looks like 2 layers. There's no depth to the mirror or anything else. So, don't shoot the messenger. If you wanna believe something else, that's perfectly within your rights, but, this is a good 3D movie, but it is not the holy grail. But if you're gonna watch it, 3D is definitely the way to watch this. It's a great lead-in to the 3rd movie now in theaters, Tron Ares. I went in spoiler-free with this, and I was pleasantly surprised. The one only thing that bothered me was the lack of sufficient exposition for what happened in between Ares and Legacy. I haven't looked into it yet if there's any canon explanations available for, what happened to Flynn's son. He was just briefly mentioned how he's no longer at the company, and it wasn't really explained. There were a few Easter eggs that were in passing, some pictures at the beginning and the end. I wasn't able to make anything meaningful out of that, so that bothered me a little bit, but I think it was a great story that really fleshed out the Tron story as a whole, and even though it was largely new characters, it still felt like a main entry in the series, and I really enjoyed it. It continues the same themes of the allegorical themes of very, religious, uh, spiritual feel to them that were, but with computers, which started in the 1st movie, was greatly expanded in the 2nd movie with the father and the son and the bad son and everything, and then, continued in this movie with, the continuing topics of, um, free will and going into the real world and that were touched on before and then expanded in the 3rd one. So how was the 3D quality? Well, like I said before, it was, definitely stepped up from Legacy. It's a stronger 3D experience, a lot of great shots and moments throughout. Even the calm shots are good, top-notch 3D. And also, as I mentioned before, I had mentioned the company Outsiders, which is a new 3D conversion, uh, company on the scene. Um, Employees from other companies that, made their own outfit that does basically human-assisted AI conversion on a budget, presumably, because these conversions do cost many millions of dollars to do them right. However, as we mentioned on a previous episode, their work on Lilo and Stitch, converting that to 3D, left a lot to be desired. Um, at the time, I compared it to iPop 3D, which releases 3D conversions of past movies onto Blu-ray, and how, if they were given the same budget, that Outsiders was given, they could have I believe they could have produced this far superior result than they ended up, giving Disney. This very weak depth, very obviously an AI conversion, with errors left in, which is not quite acceptable for the theatrical big screen or at whatever budget they were getting, which, while smaller, I'm sure was still significant and with a lot of staff members. So when I saw the, um, 3D strength in the Tron Ares trailer, I thought, "Oh, this looks like a significant step up." And, watching the movie, it was great 3D quality. It was, like, comparable to pretty much any, um, 3D movie blockbuster you'd see nowadays. So I thought, "Oh, they redeemed themselves, clearly." I chalked it up to, they had very little time with the last movie because Lilo and Stitch was switched from Disney Plus to theatrical on a shorter time frame, so maybe they just had to rush through that. However, it's also worth noting that a lot of the stereoscopic 3D shots in Ares were natively rendered and composited, so that's not really any credit to a 2D to 3D conversion team. And then looking in the end credits, we see DNEG credited, and they're an established 3D conversion house. And looking on their website, DNEG claims to have converted 529 shots, which are over 30 minutes of the film. And there was a couple shots that were weird, like one non-special effects shot towards the middle, riding under some trees, I believe it was, and the way the branches looked, because branches are notoriously hard to convert. And then towards the end of the movie, another non-special effects shot had some wonkiness in the background in the city. So now it kind of makes sense. Did Outsiders redeem themselves? No, I'm not positive that they did, because between the 30-something minutes that DNEG converted and all the native special effects shots, I wonder if the stuff that Outsiders converted was much more than the few troublesome shots that I did see, which would make sense. But again, it was almost 2-hour movie, so were there any other conversion houses involved? Sometimes they farm these out to multiple ones. I'm not positive. Or did Outsiders do a better conversion job with other scenes in the movie than they did in the ones I noticed? I don't know. All I can say is that I'm not sure at this point in time, and it's not looking quite in Outsiders' favor. So they still got to prove themselves as far as I'm concerned. They got to have a solo project with significant non-visual effects shots before I'm convinced that they're worthy of these projects. But time will tell. And who doesn't like to save money? So I'm sure they'll be hired again for future projects, and I'm interested to see if we'll get any concrete evidence of their skills. As for the 3D version of Ares, don't count on it being released on Blu-ray at this point in time. Unfortunately, it'll probably get released, of course, on Apple Vision Pro streaming, but that's a whole nother topic. Anyway, it's playing in theaters now, and I'll see you next time.